Hey everyone, Keith with Z Systems here. Today we're going to talk about Sony's newest camera, the Burano. The Burano is a fusion of Sony's three different camera lines, the Alpha line, the FX line, and the Cine Alta line. The Burano does sit within the Cine Alta lineup, but it does take technologies from those other two divisions to fuse them into what I really think is one of the most versatile cameras on the market. The Sony Burano really is a Swiss Army knife type camera. It does a lot of things really well. So whether you're a documentary shooter, a commercial shooter, a corporate shooter, it's going to have features that fit your needs, and it's going to fill a lot of different roles on set. And that's pretty incredible for one camera to do all of the things that the Burano is capable of. First thing I want to talk about with Burano is the sensor. The sensor really is the heart of a camera, and the Burano sensor is an incredibly powerful tool. It has 7 different scan modes. It can record 3 different codecs, including a 16-bit RAW. It will do up to 120 frames per second. It really is, what drives this camera in terms of how versatile it can be. So they took the best technology from both ends of the spectrum, the color science from Venice and all of the autofocus and AI technology coming up from Alpha, and they married them into one sensor for this camera. The Burano has 7 different scan modes in 4 different frame sizes. It's got full frame, it has full frame crop, which is about 95% of the sensor. It has a Super 35 mode, and a Super 35 crop mode, which is about the same size as a Micro Four Thirds sensor. And Sony has teased that with future firmware updates, they will be adding more scan modes, probably open gate, 4:3 aspect ratio, and other things that would help people shoot anamorphic with this camera. The Burano sensor also has dual base ISO. So it has 2 ISOs at which there is no gain being applied to the sensor at all. And that's 800 and 3200. This is the same technology that's used on the Venice cameras, and it is actually fundamentally different than what happens with the FX3 and the FX6 in their 2 ISO settings at 800 and 12,800. With a hardware-based dual ISO solution, what you see is a much cleaner image with the higher ISO than you would if it was just a signal process. When it's a signal process, you are still applying gain to the sensor that you are then digitally extracting out for your final image, whereas with the hardware process, there's just nothing there to extract out. It's clean, there's no gain on the sensor. Burano also features Sony's variable ND filter technology. It's the same ND filter technology we've seen since the introduction of the FS5 back in 2015. Worked its way on up, and it's available in Burano. It's a 2-stop to 7-stop filter with all of the variants in between. There's lots of cool creative ways to use it. You can even use it as an auto exposure tool for situations where the lighting might not be consistent. You got clouds coming in and out, or you're transitioning from inside to outside. It's a really useful tool, and it's a proven technology. It's been around for almost 10 years now, and Burano is the first cinema camera to receive the variable ND filter. The Burano, like Venice, essentially has 2 native lens mounts. It ships, in this configuration, it has a PL mount on it. It is an intelligent PL mount, so if you have lenses that send metadata to the camera, that data is able to be passed through, which is great for VFX shooting. It also will power and receive communication from lenses like the Fujinon Cabrios, so that you have power and communication with PL lenses. Behind the PL mount, which you can remove with 6 little hex screws, is a locking E-mount, just like you'd see on an FX9, which opens up Sony's E-mounts. They have over 70 E-mount lenses that they manufacture, and third-party lens manufacturers like Sigma and Zeiss and Tamron, they all make E-mount versions of their lenses, which are fully compatible with the cameras. And of course, with that E-mount being as versatile as it is, you can adapt to pretty much anything you can think of. One of the other great features of the Burano camera is the in-body image stabilization, or IBIS. Burano is the first camera outside of the Alpha lineup or the FX3 to feature this technology. And having it in a full cinema-type body like this is going to make transitioning from one setup to another on set much quicker, because it's going to reduce your reliance on gimbals or other rigging, so you can transition from being on a tripod to handheld very quickly, and still be confident that you're going to get a nice stable shot, because the camera is going to handle that for you. The IBIS in Burano works with any lens, so you could use it with PL, adapted EF, or anything else you can think to put on the camera. You will get 3-axis stabilization, which for Burano is roll stabilization, pitch stabilization, and yaw stabilization. And if you do take the PL mount off, there's an E mount under here. With native E-mount lenses like Sony's G-Master series, you actually get 2 more stabilization axes. You get an X-axis and a Y-axis, so that the sensor is actually moving behind the camera instead of just pivoting. And those 2 additional axes, as you can imagine, provide extra stabilization for when you're going handheld or in situations where the camera might be experiencing vibrational movements, like high wind situations. Many of the staple lenses used in the film industry for the last 50 years don't actually cover a full frame imager. They were designed for Super 35. And with this camera, because of the lens mount options and the scan mode options, you can actually use any of those lenses, whether it's vintage PL lenses or cinema zooms that were designed for the film industry. They work with this camera, and you can still record a high quality image using the scan modes of the sensor. The Burano also features Sony's superb autofocus technology. This technology came from the Alpha series of cameras and worked its way up through the FX6, FX9, and now we're seeing it in the cinema world with Burano. And it's a very versatile tool. It will do face detection, so it'll find people's faces and focus on them, and if it can, it will actually focus on the eyes of your subject. You can use the touchscreen viewfinder to tap on the screen where you want it to focus, and there's a lot of customization in how the autofocus functions. How fast the focus moves, how fast it picks a new subject if it loses the one that it's been focusing on, things like that. And it also uses AI technology to predict movement. So if it sees a person's body, it knows a body's shape. It can actually detect if somebody is walking towards the camera, away from the camera, to just make the autofocus that much more functional. And we've seen it with the FX line of cameras become a game changer in how people are shooting interviews, because you can actually set a camera and not have to worry about whether or not it's going to track focus. If you've got a subject that does a lot of movement, it just locks on and you can forget about it. Walk and talks are much easier because you don't have to focus on your focus. And so for those types of situations, interviews, fast-paced movements, documentary style shooting, it's a really useful tool that is making life on set so much better. The Burano features an 8.6K sensor. In our world where we're not, some of us aren't even delivering 4K yet, why would 8K be a desirable feature? Well, you can do a lot of creative things with an 8K imager that aren't for 8K delivery. You can do things like creative reframing, like we did when we transitioned from HD to 4K. If you've got an 8K image and your delivery is 4K, you can punch in 2 times, so you can get a close-up from a medium shot, or you can get a medium shot from a wide shot. And if your deliverable is HD, well, now you've got even more possibilities, because you can punch in 4 times on an 8K image. So you could do extreme close-ups. You could do something like if you're shooting a panel discussion, you can shoot one camera and get a bunch of different shots out of it. You can get the wide, you can get 2 shots, you can get close-ups, and it just becomes a very creative tool to use with that resolution. Another thing you can do with the 8K image is vertical extracts. We're moving more and more into a social media driven world. A lot of our content is going out on social media, and it's being asked to be shot vertically. With an 8K imager, you can actually shoot 4K vertical, almost 4 times with one shot. And so you can extract out those verticals, without having to, get creative with your rigging, turning your camera on its side, things like that. So it makes it simpler. And then, another thing that the extra resolution provides us is, downsampling. When we downsample from a larger image to a smaller image, the end result is going to be sharper and cleaner than, an image shot at that resolution. So, on Burano, for example, shooting in Super 35 mode, that's a 6K scan. And recording that at 4K or just downsampling it to 4K makes for a cleaner image, a sharper image, and it's actually the same thing that the FX9 does with its sensor. It's a 6K sensor, it shoots 4K, and that's why the FX9 is the sharpest of the FX cameras. Shooting in 8K is also great for anamorphic. Most of the time we think of anamorphic as being stretched, because we're taking an image that's been squeezed and stretching it back out for our deliverable. Because we're in a digital world and we're dealing with pixels, that is realistically actually squishing the vertical. You're taking your full height resolution and you're squishing it down to restore proportions and things like that. And because we're using an 8K sensor, once we de-squeeze or squeeze, depending on how you want to think about it, we are left with 4K resolution height. So we can actually shoot 4K anamorphic without any upscaling or anything like that that you might have to do with other cameras. Burano has 3 different recording codecs to give you flexibility depending on what your deliverables are, who your client is, and what sorts of flexibility you need in post-production. The camera has XAVCI, which we should all be familiar with. It's been in use with Sony cameras for over a decade, and it works with any editing software you want to use. For cinema shooters, or if you just need as much post flexibility as possible, the camera has XOCN LT. XOCN stands for Extended Tonal Range Original Camera Negative. It is Sony's 16-bit codec. It behaves exactly like RAW, but to avoid violating patents held by other camera manufacturers, there's something about it that technically doesn't meet the definition of RAW as set out in that patent. But in terms of how it works in an editor, it's RAW. 16-bit is an amazing amount of color information. Most RAW recordings are 12-bit, and 16-bit has 16 times more color information than those recordings. It has 280 trillion colors that it can detect. And when compared to a 10-bit recording like XAVC, it has 64 times more information. And the version of XOCN in the Burano, it's the LT version. The recording size of XOCN LT is actually smaller than any ProRes variant of the same resolution. So even though you're getting this incredibly rich, deep recording, you're not taking massive amounts of hard drive space to do so. The last recording mode for Burano in terms of codec is a new codec that Sony has introduced with Burano, XAVC-H. It is designed for 8K capture with 10-bit 422 color information, and there's 2 variants in the camera. There's HQ and SQ, just different data rates. One is a little bit higher quality than the other one. As of the recording of this video, the only editing software that will work with the XAVC-H natively is Adobe Premiere Pro. I do expect that Resolve and Final Cut will both also get support for XAVC-H in the near future. The form factor of the Burano camera is another element that adds to its versatility. It is significantly smaller and lighter than the Venice camera, while offering almost all of the same cinematic features, and it is smaller than the FX9, although it is a tiny bit heavier than the FX9. So it is well within the size and weight requirements for small gimbals like the RS series from DJI or the June Crane gimbals. So you can use those smaller, cheaper gimbals with this camera instead of needing a big, like Ronin 2 or Movi system. It's also well suited for rigging for shoulder use for ENG cameras or dock shooting. Yeah, it's this big. The things that you get with the Burano when you purchase, obviously you get the camera body, you get a top handle, you get the PL mount. It does come with a V-mount battery plate on it. You do also get the viewfinder, which is a pretty standard viewfinder. It is a touchscreen, so you can touch operate the camera, menus and focus and things like that. And of course there's a decent number of assignable buttons and other functions that are part of the viewfinder. And that is included with the camera, which is a bit of an anomaly for cinema cameras. Most cinema cameras don't actually ship with their own viewfinder. Optional accessories for the Burano. There's only one official accessory that you can buy, which is the side grip. It is, for all intents and purposes, identical to the grips that you can see on the FX6, the FX9, the FS7s, with all the buttons and functionality. They have upgraded the arm a bit from the 9, so it's easier to do adjustments. And if you don't want to buy this one, and you have an FS7 laying around, the FS7 hand grips work with the cameras just fine. It's the same port, same controls. You just don't get the fancy new arm, which is a nice feature, but this is $1,500, and if you already own an FS7, that's going to be free. Unofficial accessories. The Burano does have a little port on the top, so you can actually take an FX9 top handle, and it will connect with the camera body. Mounting points for the viewfinder are essentially the same, and what that would give you is a multi-interface shoe on the top handle for the audio accessories that Sony has. They're wireless systems. You can add XLR ports that way. So that is another option for accessorizing with parts from other Sony cameras. The Burano comes equipped to use standard cinema style batteries like this brick battery. It is V-mount, which is Sony's standard and standard across a lot of other brands. If you needed to go to a gold mount battery, you can do that very easily with a sandwich plate from Wooden Camera or Core SWX or any other battery manufacturer brand will have something that would let you adapt to gold mount style batteries. The recording media that Burano uses is CF Express Type B. It is a faster media type that's been introduced with other camera systems. It's not exclusive to Burano, and it's not exclusive to Sony. They're compact cards. The camera has 2 card slots for them, and they are fast enough for recording that 16-bit RAW. The reason that we don't see the XOCN ST or XT versions in the camera is just pure data rate. And one of the reasons for that decision, I think, is to keep the operating cost of this camera lower than it would otherwise be. Venice 2, for example, which can shoot those other versions of XOCN, uses Sony's AXS media, which runs about $4,000 per terabyte, which is a pretty big expense on top of just buying the camera, whereas a 1 terabyte CF Express Type B card, depending on the manufacturer, ranges from $500 to $1,000. SanDisk, Lexar, ProGrade, Sony. There's a bunch of brands out there, and the cost varies a little bit. That's one of the nice things about going with this type of media is the media is, by comparison, very affordable for a cinema-style camera. I hope we've answered some of your questions about the Burano camera. If you have more questions or are interested in purchasing a Burano, please reach out to us at Z Systems. You can find our contact information, including a link to our website, in the description of this video.